A quick disclosure. This presentation is not to be taken as investment advice and should not be relied on for such advice or as a substitute for consultations with professional accounting, tax, legal, or financial advisors. The observations made are independent of Zoe Financial and should not be read as financial recommendations. Now, I'd like to introduce you to Natalie Yeager, our Director of Growth Marketing.
Hi, everyone, and thank you again for taking the time to join us today. I'm very excited to introduce our host for today's webinar, Andres Garcia-Amaya, CEO and founder of Zoe Financial. Prior to Zoe Financial, Andres was an executive director at JP Morgan Asset Management, where he helped oversee $300 billion in assets. Prior to JP Morgan, Andres worked in Morgan Stanley's Institutional Equity Division, where he developed investment ideas and conveyed equity market insights to institutional clients. He is a CFA charter holder and obtained his MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, where he received both the Joseph Wharton Fellowship for Outstanding Record of Academic Achievement and the Toego Foundation Fellowship. Andres, take it away.
Thank you so much, Natalie and Alexandra, and thanks so much for helping us put this webinar together. None of this stuff would be possible without your help, so thanks so much. And I am thrilled to introduce my partner today on this journey of explaining how advisors get paid and basically giving you a roadmap of how the industry works. So our expert panelist is John Chapman. He's a certified financial planner as well as a certified Kingdom advisor. He is a partner and financial planner at WorthPointe, which is one of the great RIA firms, independent firms that are part of the Zoe network. I think putting aside how great of an advisor and planner John Chapman is, and just to remind people, right, 5% of people that we interview, of advisors that we interview, get into the network, right? So putting aside how great John is and what he does, what I think was really relevant to this conversation today as well is that prior to WorthPointe, John was a vice president financial consultant at Fidelity Investments, and I believe you mentioned also worked at Merrill Lynch.
Correct.
So I think that's really relevant because he knows how the sausage is made. He was in the industry, call it in the dark side, and then eventually joined WorthPointe to be a fiduciary advisor. And I think that's really important, right? If you have somebody that's been in both worlds, they're going to be able to point out some of the good stuff and some of the things to be aware of. So thanks so much, John, for joining us.
Hey, I'm honored to be here, Andres. Thanks for having me, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Awesome. All right. So just before we get into the agenda of today, I know that we have a number of folks that might be joining the webinar today that are not as familiar with Zoe. So let me take a quick second to explain what Zoe is, right? So first, our mission is to empower Americans to make better financial decisions, starting with whom they hire as a financial advisor, right? So think of us as that matchmaker between people that are looking to hire a fiduciary financial advisor and fiduciary financial advisors that have been heavily vetted to get into our network. And as I mentioned earlier, we mean it when we say vetted. In your area, we probably interviewed 20 to 25 to find one that was at the level of competence as well as aligned interest for what we believe every American deserves. So that's a little bit about Zoe. What the agenda for today will cover, and we'll make sure to have plenty of time for questions at the end, is first, what is the difference between a fiduciary advisor and a broker? The second topic we'll cover is what are the different types of fee structures that advisors offer to their clients? And we'll go on in a fair amount of detail there to explain how it works. Third, are fees worth it, right? And this is provide a little bit of color on what the value proposition of a modern advisor should be versus maybe what they often tell you their value proposition is. And then once you become a client, you're like, wait, that's not necessarily what I signed up for. So we're going to provide some color around that, and then we'll open it up to questions. So let's just get started. What's the difference between an advisor and a broker? So I'll start with what a fiduciary advisor is. So when we talk about RIAs, is registered independent advisors. These are advisors that registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. They're regulated by the SEC, and they have a legal and ethical oath to act in your best interest. So often when you hear the term independent, what that really means is that they don't have an association with a broker dealer or a specific investment product. They're not recommending, or they don't have an incentive to recommend a particular product. Let's say, I don't know, JP Morgan funds versus American funds or Vanguard. No one's putting kind of money in their pockets to recommend those. They're solely independent from those products, right? Or from those broker dealers like a Merrill Lynch or Morgan Stanley, et cetera. So that's when people talk about an independent fiduciary advisor, that's really what they're referring to. What people refer to for brokers, and think about brokers as advisors that work at a bank, at a Merrill Lynch, at a Morgan Stanley, which Merrill Lynch is now owned by Bank of America, right? A Edward Jones. These are advisors that have other people paying them outside of the client. So what I mean by that is they might be at Merrill Lynch, and Merrill Lynch has a relationship with JP Morgan funds. And as a result of that, JP Morgan funds pays those advisors kind of a back-end deal to recommend that particular product to the client. And what that ends up happening then is that the advisor that's a broker is not required to focus on what's in your best interest. They might, right? And then we know some great advisors that work at some of these institutions, but I'm a big believer in incentives, right? So if you recommend once in a while a product that's not necessarily in your best interest, but gets them a trip to Hawaii with their family at the end of the year, you know what? They might make that choice once in a while. And they can receive kickbacks or commissions. It's legal for them to receive those kickbacks from the products that they recommend. Before I introduce the hybrid broker and an advisor, I don't know if there's any comment in there you want to throw in from your experience, John.
Sure. Andres, a couple of things I want to talk about. Just to be fair to the context of all financial advisors out there, whatever the total number is of all financial advisors, a couple 100,000 in America, most financial advisors wake up every day with a desire to help people better understand their finances. The challenge is the carrot that people are running after is different depending on whether or not they're an RIA or they're a broker. And in the broker channel, the carrot they're running after is a commission that could be different from one fund family versus another. Maybe this one pays you a little bit higher this month and that one pays a little higher that month. Or the carrot could be, I want to be on my boss's good list and I need to sell this amount of annuities this month. And whoever comes into my lap, I'm gonna put forward this product because that makes me feel or look better on my manager. And that's a carrot that they're running towards and a frame of reference that they have through their working days. And that's part of their motivation, which is just completely different than the RIA model. And the carrot that we're running after in the RIA model is simply to help people well, do it efficiently, do it as a fiduciary status to be well recognized, well respected by our peers, and really serve a few families as best as possible. And that's what, gives us joy and some peace of mind as a financial advisor. So just a couple of my quick thoughts there, Andres.
No, that's perfect. And you mentioned something at the end there that was key, which is you mentioned fewer families, right? One of the, call it side effects of focusing on selling product rather than the client being the only one paying is that if you go to, and you could speak to this when you were at Fidelity, when you speak to an advisor at Fidelity or Schwab, and not to pick on any of them really, and you ask them, how many clients do you specifically have? The answer is probably going to be, 500 or 700 families.
Correct. Right.
Maybe if they're new, they'll say 100, right? But they don't cap out until like 500, 700, even more than that. And that tells you something, right? It's like,
it does.
It tells you that it is really a volume game for them to get as many families that they could sell the product, rather than if they were getting paid by you specifically only. How do you actually keep those clients when you can't even, I can't remember more than 70 people at a time, right?
Right.
So if you have 500 families that you're supposed to know in detail their specific situation is very difficult, which is often why we see a lot of families leaving the broker to find an advisor. Is like, I just feel like he or she's not there for me. Like she doesn't really know who I am.
Definitely. I think from a consumer standpoint, from the people that are trying to hire somebody, sometimes people will hire brokers based on the firm name versus hire an individual as an RIA. And if you're hiring Merrill Lynch or Fidelity Investments, the good side for those businesses themselves is that they're going to have millions of customers and very few representatives to service all those customers. And so at Fidelity, my personal experience is I was tasked with overseeing 600 families over the course of the year. And there were metrics to track how many we got in contact with and had meetings with and we sold products to, but you just simply can't remember 600 people and serve them well. And that's where the fiduciary status falls off. How could I know to talk to somebody about their Medicare planning when I can hardly remember their name? Right. And so, yeah, I think it's important for people to know, pulling back the curtain a little bit. It's a good problem to have maybe for these big brokerage companies, but when it comes down to it, if I put myself in the shoes of the consumer, I want somebody who knows me and my situation, and I don't really care if they've got 500 people that they're supposed to work on. That's a challenge for them.
Yep. And then there's a last type, so we talked about fiduciary advisors that are independent. We talked about brokers, and then there's hybrid advisors. And the reason that the word hybrid is used is that they're actually duly registered, one with the SEC as an independent advisor, and then they're also registered with a broker dealer. So you could actually, as an advisor, be registered with both. So, as an example, you could be an independent advisor. Let's call it, I don't know, Money Wealth is the name of the firm. And then be registered with the SEC. And then you could also be registered with LPL or Ameriprise as an independent broker dealer.
Right.
And the issue with this is, as you could imagine, super confusing for the consumer.
Yeah.
But two, and something that's more important to be aware of, is that they could switch hats. They could say, well, I am a fiduciary when I work under the hat of independent RIA registered with the SEC, but I'm also registered with this independent broker dealer. And, once in a while, I will get paid for selling a product. So for the consumer, this is an area to be really careful about when you hear this duly registered, and ask, are you duly registered or are you an independent advisor? This is when you're going to get people being like, whoa, who do you talk to? How do you know all this stuff, right? So it can be very hard to tell if they're really acting in your best interest if they could change hats. And the best analogy that I've come up with this is, think about a fiduciary independent advisor as the equivalent of a doctor in the healthcare space, where they have a fiduciary responsibility to do no harm, right? Like, you need to make sure that you understand why is it that you're going to operate on that client. You just can't be like, well, I don't know, they told me to operate, I'm coming in here to operate. Like, there's a responsibility to really understand the situation and do the best they can for that client. Versus a pharma sales rep. And I know a couple of pharma sales rep, great people, and they know what their job is. Their job is to sell pharmaceutical products to doctors. There's no confusion. Nothing wrong with that. Some of them are great at what they do. I know a couple of people from my school that, God bless them, they do an amazing job on recommending what drug for the doctor to have in their shelf to pick from, right? The issue with hybrid advisors and even brokers is that they also call themselves doctors, right? So it's the equivalent of my buddy who is a pharma salesperson saying, well, today I'm actually going to put the white coat on and I'm your doctor. So don't worry, I'm a doctor. I know what I'm doing. And then halfway through it, take off the coat and say, but I also get paid on this product. I'm not going to tell you that. I just know that I get a trip to Hawaii if I recommend that one, right? That's essentially what's happening when you hire either a hybrid advisor or a broker, because a lot of brokers, they'll often use the terminology of like, I'm doing this in your best interest. It's like the same way maybe that a pharma salesperson will tell the doctor, I really believe you should buy this product from me. It's like, I know, that's why you work there. Well, you also get to go to Hawaii if you sell me that product. So I don't necessarily think there's an unbiased opinion. So that's the best kind of concept that I could think of, which kind of blows your mind if you think about it, right? Because hiring an advisor to help you with some of the most important financial decisions you make in your life, I'd rather not have the pharma salesperson be the one that's helping me with those type of decisions. And I don't know if you would add anything to it, John.
Yeah, I'd say my experience with hybrid advisors is they could have been brokers in the past and they moved to a model that was a hybrid. Maybe they moved to LPL and they have, XYZ Chapman Financial Services, something to that extent. And what they're attempting to do is have one foot in each door. They'll offer services where they'll have a diversified mix of mutual funds that they'll charge a fee for. But if you wanted to buy a one-off stock or a one-off mutual fund or a one-off annuity, they'll still going to earn a commission for soliciting that product. Yep. And so they've got their feet in the fire of both hats. And so the trouble is that the consumer just might not know that. And, yep. and they might expect that the advisor is working on the best interest, but they're simply not. And I can acknowledge, it's just hard for customers to really understand that, which is why they need to be armed with this education and really make sure that they ask those good questions up front.
Absolutely. No, thanks. That's a great caller. Okay. So if you have questions on what we covered here, make sure to either put them directly right now into the chat function, or we're happy to address it also at the end when we go through the next couple of slides here. So moving through the advisor fee structures, and there's three main ones, right? The first one, and more prevalent within the industry, is assets under management, often referred to, this is typical finance stuff, like there's all these acronyms that no one understands except, the people that are actually doing the work every day, and therefore they think everyone knows it. AUM, you'll hear this all the time. So it's assets under management. And is the most common structure, mostly because the industry used to solely focus on people that are retiring, that had all the assets, therefore, and it was the easiest ways to charge for it. And it still, I think, offers a very compelling way of paying the advisor. But let me describe what it actually means, right? So let's say that you have $1 million and you're retiring. How you would pay the advisor to help steward that money through your retirement is as a percentage of that $1 million. Usually it would be somewhere around 1%. So in essence, you would pay $10,000 for that advisor to help you manage that $1 million. And if that $1 million, let's say, became over time $2 million, the advisor would make more money. That percentage would probably come down from 1%, a little bit lower than 1% if it's 2 million versus 1 million, right? And this is usually where the downside of how people think about it is, so I go from 10,000 to 16,000 just because my money grew that I'm paying the advisor? That seems like a lot of money, right? So that's the downside of this structure, is that it's flexible on the way up, meaning the advisor also makes more money if your assets grow. It also works in the way down. And that's the interesting aspect of it is, right? Like in March, when the market fell 38% and even a well-diversified portfolio fell 15, 20%, you're paying 20% less for the advisor while your portfolio fell 20%, right? So there is a bit of aligned incentives if what you're trying to do is protect your assets and over time grow your assets. The advisor is going to be also very incentivized to make sure that they don't derail that portfolio, because they won't make the same kind of amount of money that they would otherwise. Like anything in life, there's pros and cons, but that gives you a little bit of a sense of what is it that you're paying. Usually within the assets under management structure, you're getting financial planning and investment management. And often these terms are like, what the heck does that mean? Investment management means the actual implementation of that portfolio, meaning the advisor is going to say, well, okay, you're going to give me discretion over that portfolio, and I'm going to do all the things that are necessary to ensure that that your portfolio is in good hands when it comes to rebalancing, managing your tax situation, tax harvesting, capital gains management, the volatility of the portfolio, all that stuff. The advisor is going to basically get their hands dirty and actually do, versus the financial planning aspect of it, which is not the actual implementation of the money, but what is it that your goals are? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? Do you have the necessary cash flow, to save? Do you have the necessary cash flow when you're retiring? Social security management, healthcare management, all the, state planning, tax planning. That's the financial planning aspect of it. And often within the assets under management structure, you're getting both. You're getting both services within that structure. Now you got to be careful, because a lot of advisors will say they offer both, but the financial planning is super light. Like they actually don't do much of any financial planning. This is one of the areas that Zoe really focuses to make sure that the advisors that are in our network actually deliver what they promise. Like if they say they're going to do financial planning, like, are they? Right? We get all their sample plans. Yeah, John could attest to this. Like we drill them. Like show us how you know this stuff and how the client would actually get the service.
Yeah.
The other aspect that's important to keep in mind is essentially the fee structure changes the more assets you have. So I mentioned 1% for 1 million. If you have 5 million, it's not going to be 1% on 5 million. Most likely it's going to be discounted from that 1%. And the range could be somewhere between all the way to, I've seen, 0.5%, 50 basis points, so 0.5%. But that tends to be for, a $10 million account, an $8 million account. And versus maybe 0.78, 0.75, 0.8 if it's a $2 or $3 million account. And this is the type of stuff that is why it's important to interview a number, 2 or 3 advisors if you're looking for one, just to get a sense of that, right? To get a sense of the pricing. And we're happy to answer more questions specifically about those kind of ranges. But I don't know if there's anything you would add around the assets under management fee structure and what they get.
Yeah, I think the assets under management structure it seems as if, Andres, that's the most common way that registered investment advisors operate. And so it's important for customers to know that this is the main way that advisors will charge fees. I think that first, I'll just acknowledge that there's no perfect silver bullet from a fee system. People's lives change, their statuses change, and they may have different preferences. So I just want to acknowledge that. But of all of the fee options, the reason that AUM has is so popular is because it's the closest advisors can get to being on the same side of the table as their customers. We want to, of course, preserve their assets. That means help them in bad markets. And we also want to help them grow in alignment with their risk tolerance. And so that way, if we're doing a good job, then their fee accounts will grow, and then hopefully that the fees will increase over time. But it's also important to break out that there's both financial planning and investment management happening here. And that unbundling is an important conversation that every advisor really needs to talk about as a fiduciary. And just if I can really quick, financial planning has 5 categories to it: retirement planning, investment management, tax planning, estate planning, and insurance planning. And these 5 categories is really what holistic financial planning means. Retirement planning is starting with the end in mind and working backwards. How much do you have saved? Investment management is how risky or not should I be? Tax planning should be, what's the impact of exercising my stock options? Insurance planning is, if I pass away tomorrow, do I have enough to cover my mortgage and my wife and my kids for the rest of their life? And I'm blanking on estate planning is what happens if I get sick or incapacitated, or I pass away, and what happens to my house? And so these are just areas that they might be inclusive of the one assets under management fee, and that's okay to do in practice, but it's just important that customers know that going in so they understand the full value of it.
Yeah, and that's the area where we'll talk a little about this on the value of what the advisor offers, but just keep in mind that is, in our mind, where actually the biggest upside from what you get out of the advisor comes from the planning. But that wasn't the case even 10 years ago. The industry's changing. And one of the reasons that Zoe has been so successful is that not every advisor actually is there yet. Like a lot of advisors don't even have the training to do the proper financial planning. But if they do, we find that there's a lot of value there, more than actually on the investment side, right? This is the area that people actually have more control than the investment side. You don't control what the markets are going to do, but you could control how much insurance you get. You could control if you have a will and for estate planning. Those are things that you could actually control, and therefore, you should focus more on, right?
Yeah. Andres, I just want to touch on one thing before I forget, and this might be a segue into some of the other fee structures.
Sure.
One of the potential downsides customers might feel, again, is that this feels as I'm not exactly sure up front what I'm getting for my 1% fee on $500,000 to $5,000. But that's incumbent on the advisor for being able to explain that and show the value. On the other side, though, one of the benefits to clients and customers is that they're not paying for the fee out of their cash flow, out of their pocket on a quarterly basis, because it gets pulled from the investment portfolio as it ebbs and flows over time. So if you have have your working salary, and you've got your $500,000 from an old 401k, when you're paying the fee of, let's say, $1,000 a quarter or something like that, you're not necessarily going to disrupt from your working cash flow and expenses. And some people feel as if that they prefer that. It doesn't work for everybody, of course, but that's just, again, continuing to weigh some of the pros and cons.
No, absolutely. And that leads me on to the second one, which is a flat fee arrangement. And flat fee arrangement, just to give us an example, is, let's say that you're a family that you're in your 30s and you need a ton of planning help. You might have combined assets of $200,000, $300,000 that are still sitting in your current company 401ks, right? That's one example. And you say, you know what, I've never hired an advisor. I don't even know what I'm getting myself into. What I do know is I need planning for my college planning for the newborn that we just had. We need planning start thinking about retirement. We need to start finding ways to reduce our tax bill, etc. Flat fee is becoming a structure that is coming up, and especially for the younger demographic. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what it offers, what it doesn't offer, the upside of it, the downside of it. So what does it offer? There are exceptions, but for the most part, what a flat fee arrangement, and just to give you a sense of what that flat fee arrangement is, think of it as a subscription-based model, right? Where you might pay upfront $800, $1,000, because there's a lot of upfront effort from the advisor to do the planning, right? Sometimes 15, 20 hours behind the scenes to actually get to know you and do the planning, etc. And then after that, there might be somewhere between $100 to $400 a month, depending on how complicated your situation is. Do you own your own business? Are you divorced? Do you have special needs children? Or there's things obviously that would change the amount of work that goes into the planning. But that's essentially how you pay. You either pay per month on a quarterly basis, and often with maybe an upfront fee to cover all the upfront effort and hours that the advisor puts into the planning. But most times, flat fee do not cover the investment side. And this is why I was giving the example of the younger couple that might not even have the assets, essentially, for someone to manage. So the financial planning focused relationship would cover that holistic financial planning that John described, right? Looking at the 5 kind of cornerstones and creating a plan. And usually flat fee is also an ongoing relationship, right? It's a way, like a stepping stone to get to know that advisor, maybe for later when you have the assets. And so the advisor might provide guidance on your investment strategy, even if it's on your 401k, but they won't have the ability to actively implement it. They're not going to be the one driving, right, how that money is actually managed on a month or yearly basis. So they might recommend things, but the consumer is the one that's actually implementing those changes. That's basically it. I would say that on the upside versus assets under management is that it's a fee that you could kind of see on paper and you're like, okay, got it. So I'm paying $5,000 this year, regardless of what happens to my portfolio, right? So that's the upside. And I think for some people, that's like, in essence, a nice kind of visual of like, I know exactly what I'm going to pay this year. The downside of it in my mind is also that if you're in your 30s and you're kind of ramping up your income, but that's kind of what you live off, then it's like, it's coming off your pocket, right? Like it's coming off what's coming in. And from that perspective, at first it might feel great. You're like, well, at least it's not coming off my investable assets, but it also hurts when it comes out of your paycheck directly, right? Out of your income. So like anything else, the idea is for people to understand what their options are. One thing that's clear for any service that you end up purchasing is that there's pros and cons, right, to all of them. And I'm happy to address if there's other areas that you have questions on flat fee. But this is definitely one that has become an option that wasn't even around 10 years ago for those younger, for that younger demographic that might not even have the assets yet. Hey, look, I have $100,000 in my 401k. I make good money. My wife makes good money, but we do need the help, right? So that's usually where this would come in handy. Anything else you would add there on the flat fee?
Yeah, I think the flat fee is an awesome offering that wasn't around even just a decade ago.
Right.
And so the fact that the flat fee model is now available from fiduciary advisors to consumers is just a dramatic benefit. And it's increased the size of customers that advisors can work with, because it's not just catered towards the affluent or people that have $1 million. Now, it can go, if at first flat fee was deemed as help the younger generations that don't yet have assets, but it's no longer that. It can also be somebody that's in their 50s or 60s. But flat fee often can incorporate the same 5 pillars: retirement planning, investment management. Now, it might be management. It might be like investment consultation, where you're taking temperature on someone's risk tolerance. You know, the insurance, the tax planning, the estate planning. So it might cover similar areas, but I think you brought up a good point, Andres. It's who's leading the charge to actually implement and execute. And that's just a pro and con you have to weigh. Some people feel like they have the time and the ability, the desire to execute on the investment part. So they just want a consultation, or they have the ability to execute on the insurance part. And other people feel as if their life is busy, or they would just prefer not to spend the time to do that. And so,
And at times, some people will start with flat fee to kind of get a sense of what is it that the value is. And then once they feel more comfortable, they're like, wait, I wasn't doing any of that, and I don't plan on doing any of that. So actually like, let's switch to assets under management, so you could just, manage it for me. We see that a fair bit.
Yeah. And one other just benefit of this too is that we just have to acknowledge that life can change so quickly and without us really knowing. And COVID's a really good case study for that. But what the flat fee offers is the advisor to have a close relationship with the client as they go through different seasons in life. Maybe they buy a house, they have a baby, they change jobs, they get let go, they have to do unemployment, they get a new job, and now they've got new compensation packages. And so the flat fee model really at its best is done with an ongoing relationship expectation built into it, so that the advisor has some consistency for communication and knowing their situation.
Yeah. And actually, last thing that I'll say about flat fee is just because something is flat fee doesn't mean that all the services will be the same. So you got to be cognitive of that. And what I mean by this is that similar question of earlier of how many clients you have, you specifically, advisor, because we've seen cases where an advisor will say, I don't know why anyone would pay more than $300 a year for planning. And then you ask, well, how many planning clients you have? It's like 1,500. It's like, okay, well, that's a different level of high touch service than maybe someone that had 150, right? So it's really important to keep that in mind. Someone's put yourself in their shoes, and it's like, well, you have 1,500 clients. Like, how could you possibly provide the same level of service than maybe the one that has 100, right? So price, it sometimes is a good proxy of what you're actually going to get. Meaning, if someone's charging 1,500, for the upfront planning and then an ongoing relationship is another 150, and they have 80 clients in total, well, that kind of makes sense versus maybe someone that all in will charge $800 for the year on an ongoing basis, but they have 1,500 clients, right? It might, at that point, it might be like a quick questionnaire with a cookie cutter response, which it's fine. Just know that is what you're getting versus the other option. So like anything else in life, you need to look at what you're actually going to get out of it instead of just the price that you're paying.
Yeah, well said.
Okay. And then the last type of fee structure is the one-time plan. And like anything else that I mentioned, there's pros and cons. So the pros, it tends to be a lot cheaper than paying an ongoing relationship, right? Meaning on paper, it tends to be cheaper. You might pay $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 for a one-time plan from a great advisor. Again, there's time I've seen it where someone might charge $200 for a comprehensive financial plan, right? Like, I don't know how comprehensive that could be. Nonetheless, price. So in some cases, someone might be like, Andres, all of this sounds great, but I really can't afford right now the $5,000 a year or $4,000 a year for an ongoing relationship. I just want a one-time plan to just kind of get me organized. And I think there's merit to that. You're paying per hour, essentially, instead of for that ongoing relationship. The downside, and this is one of the areas that I personally am like very conflicted, because I want to make sure everyone gets as much flexibility on where they start a relationship with an advisor, right? Like, in essence, remove the friction point is usually the answer. The issue and the conflict that I have just personally is that often the one-time plan what it basically means is, here's a comprehensive look of a snapshot in time of your situation, right? And two, now it's all up to you to go execute it. And the danger with that, speaking from experience, is that most people won't go do it. So what ends up happening is that they take the plan and they like put it somewhere, and then next thing you know, mail piles on top of it. And then like 8 months later, you're looking for something and it like falls to the ground and you're like, oh, right, our financial plan, right? And then what ends up happening is that you look at it and you say, this financial planning is total crap, right? Like, it was worthless. I spent $1,500 and all I got was a stupid document that I did nothing with. So that's the conflict that I have, is that the more I've been kind of with Zoe doing this type of work, we see it play out and we're like, now they actually think that it doesn't serve any purpose because they didn't implement it themselves, right? So that's the downside. Now, if you're super self-disciplined and you're like, look, I cut my own grass, I paint my own house, and I enjoy it, and I'm going to do that plan on my own, and like, then totally this could be the way to go, right? I personally, for instance, when I started a new workout routine, or I'm trying something, I like to hire someone to keep me accountable, because if it doesn't work out the first 2 weeks on my own, I'll just be like, forget it. That sucks. I wasn't meant to do it, right? So that accountability aspect of it is really important. And also the other aspect of it is that, and you hit on this, John, that people always, we rarely hear someone come in and say, my situation is complicated, right? Everyone comes in saying, look, I know you might have different clients, but my situation is super simple. Right. It's so easy. It is so easy. I don't need help outside of this plan. And then 10 questions deep, they're like, well, yes, I am a W-2 employee, but I am considering eventually starting my own business. And actually, at some point, I would like to take some time off, or my wife would like to take some time off. And actually, now that I think of it, we were thinking about buying a bigger house down there. And then next thing you know, it's like, actually, just because you're not a multimillionaire does not mean that your personal situation is not complex. It should be, meaning everyone deserves to have that nuance about their life. And I think that one-time plan often doesn't kind of really incorporate enough knowledge for the advisor to help you navigate how your life changes throughout time, which is what you were saying, John, right? It's like life changes. I mean, COVID's a crazy example of it, but even if there wasn't COVID, you have your second child, right? Your wife decides, you know what, I'm going back to work, and maybe it's your time to basically be home more around the house. What do you think about that? It's like, crap, maybe we should talk to our financial planner to see how this works, right? So, and I'm speaking from experience, like my wife's an absolute baller, and her career like took off early on. It's like, okay, well, we need to account for that. Like, how has that changed our finances, right? So there's a lot of nuance to this, and everyone deserves for their complexity of their life to be talked out loud, instead of saying, no, my life's simple. No one's life's simple, no matter if you're 25 or 60 years old. So anyways, I could talk about this stuff forever, but this is one of those areas, as you could sense, I'm conflicted, because I want everyone to have access to a plan, but often they have that access to the plan and they say, oh, this doesn't work. And it's like, oh, it's because we didn't execute it, because we didn't act on it.
You bring up some good points, Andres, and I just want to add on to it to provide a little bit more color. To be putting myself in the shoes of people that are looking for financial advice. Most often, they come to this point in their life where they're at a crossroads. There's a decision to be made. It's painful enough to where they want to reach out to somebody. And so, I totally acknowledge that most people anticipate that they need a one-time financial plan. I want to know whether or not it's better to rent versus buy. I want to know whether or not I should do the college fund or not. I just left my job. What do I do with my stock options and my 401k? And that's it. And I'm out. And so I totally acknowledge that. And so there is, of course, as you mentioned, Andres, validity to a one-time financial plan. You're paying a fee for some hours and some advice, and you could totally walk away at that. But you just also have to understand a fiduciary advisor is going to want to take your temperature, your blood pressure, understand what your joints are and your muscles are. And they're wanting to come from this as a completely different mindset, which is, in order for me to give you the best advice, I really want to know more about your situation, all as it fits in together. Because if I tell you one thing about your 401k, but I actually don't know about your parents who just got divorced and your dad is sick, then that might completely change some of the advice. And so, I think it's just important to know the differing opinions or perspectives when clients are coming to first seek out financial advice, and advisors are trying to look at just the pain point right now and then the broader situation.
Yeah. All right. So the last aspect here, is what questions to ask when it comes to, when you're interviewing this. And we actually have a whole webinar on this. So I'm not going to go all the way in depth, but I'm going to focus on the questions related to price, essentially, and fee structures. So the simplest one is, how do you get paid? And this is an area that it should be crystal clear to you. How is it that they get paid? Are there any additional hidden fees? What is another way of asking the question is, what is the all-in cost if I decide to hire you? And it should not be confusing to them. Right? Like, if you start getting the, well, it's complicated and, all you need to know is that it's free for you, or, that's the wrong answer, right? This usually comes up, for instance, with annuities or very complex products. This is where they're like, no, it's all embedded. Don't worry about it. It's on the house, right? Wrong. You should run if you hear those type of answers, because the more that the price is all into whatever you're paying, and they're not able to kind of break it up, the more is likely that you're not getting a fair deal here. So a good explanation, a good answer here is, okay, so let's assume that we're going to manage that $500,000. It would be $5,000 in the advisory fee. And based on everything that we know, the range for the actual investment products we would use, let's say, would be all in an additional, I'm just making this up, $500 a year. And this is why it's $500 a year. Let me show you a little bit of the products that we have chosen, which we incorporated costs big time into it to ensure you're not paying a fortune for products that you don't need. And by the way, there might be some transactional cost. So we ran the numbers, and it would likely be something like X, right? That way, in your mind, you might be like, oh man, I didn't know about these other two costs. That's right. We're making sure you understand exactly what range you would pay all in. Because the last thing you want is, like, when I'm trying to, get a new Verizon line or something, and then, like, you get it on the mail and there's like 8 other fees that you're like, what the heck is this? They didn't even tell me about this one. I don't even know what this one means, right? So it should be crystal clear what are the costs. And it's one of those hard ones because it's easier in the ears to say, oh, it's this one. Oh, fine, right? Great, let's move forward. It's actually easier. And that's why actually a lot of big banks have been very successful, because they could just show you one fee and you're like, that sounds a lot cheaper than what those guys told me, right? That's cheaper than what WorthPointe told me, so I'm gonna go with them. And then 6 months in, after you put all your efforts to onboard as a client, you're like, wait a minute, this mutual fund costs 1% in addition to the 1% that I'm paying you. I'm paying 2%. I didn't know that, right? So you have to know what the all-in cost. And that's one thing that we love about working with independent advisors, that you're the one that are paying them, is that it's not that hard. They can tell you, this is what you're going to pay. It's pretty simple. There's no hidden fees. And I don't know if there's anything else that you add to this question around, how do you get paid?
Yeah. One thing I want to add is maybe just example or a story.
Mm-hmm.
If you go see a pediatrician for one of your children, you have to pay for the consultation with a pediatrician. And then the pediatrician is going to say, go buy Advil and take 2 for your children, and take 2 every hour. So you have to go to CVS and then buy a packet of Advil. And so there's 3 things happening there. First, you pay for the advice. And then second, you have to go to a physical location, CVS, And then next you have to buy the Advil. And so Advil's made by Pfizer, a drug company. They specialize in making drugs, and their cost is X. And CVS has to pay the rent, and so their cost is X plus Y. And there might be a small margin there for them. But those are then, you essentially have paid for two things. And the same thing is happening with financial advice. Yeah. You talk to a fiduciary financial advisor, and there is a fee for that, and that is normal. But if we're implementing investments, you have to go to a store, which would be like a TD Ameritrade, a Fidelity Investments, a Charles Schwab. In E-Trade, you have to actually buy your investments. But then there is a fund company that has put together all of the stocks in a nice, neatly package. And that would be a Vanguard, a T. Rowe Price, and American funds. And each of these different three layers are providing a service. There's a cost for all of them. It doesn't mean they're wrong, but it's important that the advisor is upfront in sharing it. And that way consumers just know that everyone specializes in their own piece of the distribution. Right. And this is how it all gets put together.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great analogy. And I think it's one of those that at first there's a little bit sometimes of sticker shock, the same way that, you know, for healthcare, if you knew how much you actually pay, it would be, there'd be sticker shock. But the important is to understand, because you're paying it either way. It's just a question of, do you know what you're paying versus the ones that you don't know what you're paying. And often the ones that you don't know what you're paying is actually where you're paying a fortune, right? So understanding what you're paying for is really important. And then this leads me to the next one, which is, okay, that's great. I'm paying those fees. Are they worth it, right? Like what am I getting for those fees? So a couple of things. If an advisor says that the advice component is cost-free, run. Right? And this is really one of those aspects where I think is really important for people to understand. And I'll take a second to just kind of walk you through why is it that I'm saying this, right? The wealth management industry, the advice industry has drastically changed over the last 20, 30 years, right? So in the 1990s, I'll take it actually one step back. I don't know how much time you guys have. I could go back to the early 1900s, but I'll start maybe with post-World War II. The value of an advisor was actually giving you access to buy a stock, period. Meaning, like, there was no access for you to go buy a Coca-Cola stock. The only way to get access was to call your broker, your local, broker, and say, I want to buy 30 shares of Coca-Cola, right? But that was the value of advisor. And it served this purpose, because without that advisor, you couldn't get access to the markets. It was actually revolutionary that not only the multi-millionaires could buy Coca-Cola stock, right, or whatever it may be. Then over time, the advisor's role went from being that broker of like taking an order and buying Coca-Cola to actually recommending a set of stocks that would go into a portfolio, right? So they became kind of like portfolio managers. And that served this purpose because there was more diversification. Instead of like, my grandma deciding between Coca-Cola and Pepsi and owning like 3 stocks, the advisor would say, okay, let's pick 20 stocks or 30 stocks. There was value with that. But then there was innovation again, and there were mutual funds that package all the people's money in, the idea of mutual funds is they would pool the money together and get scale to be able to buy a lot more than 10 stocks or 30 stocks or 50 stocks and get you even more exposure. And the advisor's job became more of like when you go to CVS, the pharmacist, it became more like a pharmacist, right? Where they're like, yep, let me go in the back and see what we got here for the different types of mutual funds that might fit what you're looking for. And that was revolutionary. That even gave you more access to people. You fast forward from there, they became more of asset allocators, which is, you need more stock, you need more bonds, you need more cash. And they needed to get more sophisticated. They needed to learn more about how to make those decisions. That was more of like the 1990s, early 2000s, where the world is now, call it the top 5, 10% of advisors, is that they have become your household CFO. They're no longer just deciding between stock, bonds, and cash on your behalf. They're incorporating every aspect of your financial life. To your point of John, they're asking you like, oh, I didn't know that your father's sick or that they got a divorce. Like, how does that mean for your like, they're incorporating the whole picture, and the industry is slow to adapt. So what ends up happening is that you still have people that call themselves advisors that are literally still that old school, let me buy you some Coca-Cola stock. You still have some advisors that are picking more like the pharmacists, picking mutual funds on your behalf. You have some that are doing asset allocation. and then you have those household CFO ones. What the advisor that's saying this is free to you is that old school, I get paid by some other way, so I'm just gonna, give you advice, but I'm really getting paid on whatever stock or mutual fund or annuity that I'm recommending. So be careful with that and understand. It's almost like, think about those hats that I just described. It's like, what hat is this advisor wearing? Is he a household CFO? Is he an asset allocator? Is he a stock picker? Is he, swinging annuities left and right? That's really the way that you have to think about it. And I really believe that as time progresses, we're going to get more advisors that are going to be household CFOs for no other reason. That is what you want. It's what the client wants. But it's going to take time. So it's really important to understand that not every advisor is the same. Just because I have an experience with one advisor and say, oh, advisors are worthless. That advisor was just recommending me Amazon stock versus another stock. That's not what I need. It's like, well, maybe you have to interview 1 or 2 or 3 advisors until you find the one that actually serves your purpose. So the concept of fees, expensive or inexpensive, is really based on the value that the advisor provides. And you need to think long-term, right? In essence, the more well-educated you get on what is it that the advisor is going to provide, the more you could assess, is this cost worth it? And one way to think about it is, well, you're buying a house, right? It's like a big decision. Of course, price matters, and you have a range. You're like, well, I'm not going above that. I'm not going above that. But within that range, there's so many other aspects that matter, right? That, like when I bought my first home, you need to look at the neighborhood. You need to look at like the kitchen layout. You need to really try to understand, like, okay, well, I'm about to live here at least 5 years. I'm not gonna not buy this house because this one costs $3,000 more than the other one. I'm paying it's an investment. So what advisors is the same way. Is an investment of your time and effort to build that relationship. So don't just go off of price, because often that ends up being a mistake. You might be, not buying that house because it's $2,000 more expensive, and now living with a kitchen that for the next 10 years, you and your wife are like, what were we thinking? Like, this kitchen sucks, right? So that's the way to think about it. I don't know if there's anything else that you would add to this conversation.
Yeah. I got a couple just quick comments, Andres, that I want to add to this. So to the question of, are fees worth it? It might be a different frame of reference that I'd take, because there's value to advice. So it'd be more like, what am I getting for the fee that I'm actually paying? And Vanguard did a terrific study about quantifying, trying to, as the best they could, quantify into actual numbers, which we don't always have to do. What an advisor is really worth. And they broke it into 3 broad categories: will, skill, and time. Will, do I have the desire to do this on my own? Skill, do I have the knowledge to do it on my own? And time, am I willing to not do other things and prioritize this in my life? And those 3 things together, they've got subcategories, amounted to almost 3% of value that an advisor can offer somebody. And that's just a tremendous amount of value that, a company like Vanguard, we think of as a low-cost provider, they were able to do a lot of research on. And so it's more of the question of, what am I getting for the fee that I'm paying? And obviously there's a lot of friction, because for advisors that have either had or clients that have had a bad experience,
right?
There's friction there, or maybe they haven't hired an advisor and there's friction there. But this is an important relationship, and it's worth it for you to spend the time to try to find somebody you trust. And that way they really know your situation.
Yeah.
And then you will get so much value out of it when somebody is proactively thinking about you on your 64th birthday, and they say something like, you have to sign up for Medicare Part A and Part B in 1 year, and let's talk about your options. Or, or all these, lots of different scenarios based on
like
your
the
age.
Social Security one, all these things that often people are like, no, that's simple. It's like, well, there's options and you need to consider them. And the more that person's been with you in the journey, the more they'll be able to actually give you that personalized service, for sure.
Yeah, totally.
Okay. So where to view advisors' fees? This is kind of like the more technical aspect here before we wrap it up. So like anything related to regulation, there is actually a fair amount of transparency if you look for it. The problem is, like, the terminologies and the places you find this is not that intuitive, right? So advisors actually need to disclose their fees. The issue is that they'll be wrapped into a 60-page document that no one wants to read, but they must disclose them. It's somewhere, right? So one thing is you could ask and you could keep pushing. You have all the right to say, I still don't understand this. Show me where, what is it that I'm paying? There is also something called, a foreign paper will call ADV that lives within the SEC website. And John, I don't know if you ever actually found if that stands for an acronym or if that's one of those like 401k that doesn't stand for anything.
I don't know what ADV stands for. Unfortunately,
I have not found it.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think it's one of those that the government was going through letters and they're like ADV, like ADV
acronym.
Yeah. But the ADV is the document that every RIA needs to register with the SEC. And it's funny because it's the equivalent of a publicly traded company that has a 10K with the SEC. And 10K doesn't stand for anything either, by the way. Like,
exactly.
They're all just acronyms. But if you go to the SEC website or if you Google SEC advisor ADV, you could actually look for your advisor or the advisor that you're trying to interview, and you could find a lot of information around them. So for instance, does the advisor have a bad track record of client complaints or lawsuits or et cetera? That stuff actually lives there. And a lot of people don't really look into it because it's not obvious and it's not something that the advisor is going to say, especially the ones that might not have a great track record. They're not going to say, hey, you can look me up on the SEC website. So these are things that anybody could do and look at. Where Zoe comes into play for all of this is that this is stuff that we do on before we even interview advisors. We look here and we know every line of the ADV inside and out. If there's any client complaints, if there's any lawsuits, if there's any hidden fees, they don't even get to interview we have a couple of rounds of interviews. They don't even get to our first interview. Right. So this is kind of like table stakes in my mind. It's like the simple stuff. Having said that, let's say that Uncle Larry recommends somebody and you're like, you know what? I trust Uncle Larry. This is a good place to check, right? Check the SEC website to make sure that everything kind of looks kosher. And if there's any questions, or I should say, if there's anyone wants more information about this, just make sure I'll give you a couple places you can reach out to us, and we're happy to give you the links where to go so you could do it on your own, because it is a good way to get educated, even though this is not going to be your Friday night fun activity. But for whoever wants to go that level, it actually exists. It's out there. The SEC has a lot of information on each advisor, right? That is registered. So with that, I'm going to open it up to Q&A here. The last page is actually to my last point. If you have questions about, hey, Andres mentioned something about links, where I could find this, you could email us at concierge@zoefin.com, or you could call us 646-680-9244. We have a concierge team that could just kind of provide that type of material to help you on your journey, if that's an area that that you're of interest. So stop sharing here and see what kind of questions we got, and I'll make sure to swing it your way, John, if there's something that's more applicable for you. And we got a bunch already, so let me see. Oh, we got a couple ones. Okay. Let's start. Okay, so there's one here that is asking, what is the difference between Zoe and Smart Asset? Good question. So Smart Asset is another company that does connecting the consumer with a financial advisor. So from that perspective, we are solving for the same problem. And I think they have some good material on how to help the consumer to get educated on the process. The biggest difference in my mind is the curation of advisors, how they get paid. And I'm all about incentives. Like, if you figure out how people are incentivized, you'll learn everything there is. So for us, how we get paid is if you hire John through Zoe, John will share some of the revenue that WorthPointe generates with Zoe, right? So we become partners on that. And if you don't hire John, or let's say you don't hire any of the advisors that you talk to, Zoe makes zero. John does not pay us. No one in the advisor community of Zoe will pay us. So the best way to describe it, and on the other side, a smart asset would be you put in your information and they get paid by an advisor for your email and your phone number, regardless if you hire them. So maybe the best way to describe it is Zoe only gets paid if you go out on a first date and then that eventually you end up marrying that person and you stay with that person for the rest of your life versus getting paid for making an introduction for a first date, right? So maybe that's the best way to describe it. And I think for some that might work, we find that it creates a much better aligned incentives for both the advisor and the consumer. And we designed it in essence, we designed that incentive structure that way. But that's maybe as much as I'll say, because obviously I'm going to say that Zoe's the greatest thing for what we're doing, and we're very proud about the due diligence aspect. But I'll leave it at that. But that's a good question. There are other solutions out there for finding advisors. And we don't have an issue for instance. For instance, there's a company called NAFTA where you can look up for fee-only advisors, right? And we have a great partnership with them, and we think highly of them. We believe that we could provide that curated experience for the type of advisor that you want, as well as maybe a higher bar for what the competence level of that advisor. So I wasn't joking when I say that, we interviewed 20 advisors to find a John Chapman, right? And that we're very proud of that we get to that rigor to essentially find the best advisors in the country. Okay, so the next question that I have here is, okay. Wow, these questions are like super okay, let's get to business. So one is, what category do personal capital and Fisher investments fall into? Great question. Both firms are actually RIAs. They're not associated with broker dealers. Neither of those are in our network, but they do constitute RIAs. Essentially, they're not associated with broker dealers. The main question to ask for those two is, what level of service will you get? For personal capital is a lot more where you might have like 500 relationships with one advisor, and maybe that's why the price is lower. Again, it depends. You pay for what you get. But I think they're a great company, and they have very good, from a technology standpoint, a good setup. Fisher Investments is also an RIA. It's actually kind of a pioneer, one of the early RIAs. The main value proposition for them is more of the stock picking, which is one of the reasons that we couldn't feel comfortable having them in the network, because we're very focused on firms that have planning as their value proposition and then investments rather than the other way around. But I really can't say anything bad about, as I said, they were a pioneer of one of the first practices that were our RIA. Outside of that, obviously, we're happy to kind of look at your situation. What is it that you're looking for? But that at the big level, that's how I would describe, those two institutions. Let's see what else we got here. Thanks. This is super helpful. All right. Well, that's awesome. I'll take a compliment. I'll take a compliment all day. And we got a couple other ones here. Ooh. Okay, man, these are some really good questions. I thought you guys were going to throw us like layups. These are like, I came here to play. Okay, so I got one here that's, we're actually, we have some stats on this. So one is, how many advisors does your research show are offering investment implementation under a flat fee? Great question. So going back to when we were describing the different structures, there's the assets under management, there's a flat fee, and there's a one-time plan. This question is related to flat fee, but to get both planning as well as of implementation of investments. And I would say, I'll give you the amount of the percentage of advisors that even offer flat fee. Right now in the United States, RIAs, 18% of independent advisors, this is a recent survey that came out, 18% of advisors offer flat fee, while basically they might offer flat fee and AUM. That's usually the case. Versus, for instance, on the broker dealer side, 4% of advisors offer flat fee, right? Like 96% of brokers are still only offering AUM and commission, right? Which no fee only or independent advisor gets paid on the commission side. When for the flat fee that offers planning and assets under management, there's no data on that because it's so small. It's a very small percentage of advisors that offer flat fee for both. And I think this is one of those areas that over the next 5 years is going to continue to evolve to try to figure out how do we incorporate that service while feeling that the unit economics of the business makes sense. Because I could see that there's definitely a part of the population that might ask for that. So this will be an area that on Zoe's side, we're always going to be pushing the envelope of try to identify how do we actually price that? How do we help advisors price that? What type of service are you going to get for that service? So flat fee, 18%, specifically for flat fee that incorporate both. There's no data because if I had to throw a number out there, it's probably less than 5%, less than 4% that offer that offering. I don't know if there's, John, I don't know if you ran into anything else, but does that seem fair to make as a
Yeah. I mean, I think you brought it up, and this is a terrific question. Although it's such a small and niche piece of the market, there's not a ton of information on it. Yeah. I'll share from the perspective of the financial advisors, the registered investment advisors. There is a legal aspect to this that we can come up against in our fiduciary role. And if we're not having assets that are underneath our control in a traditional assets under management model, then it's less likely that an advisor is going to be open to saying that in their agreements, with their customers, that they're going to make recommendations on assets that are outside of their visibility or their control, because anything could happen. And so they're just, I think there's a disconnect there. So some advisors might simply help somebody during the financial planning engagement implement on their investments, but the customer is the one clicking the trade button. And then after that, the advisor can't reasonably be on the hook for watching that stock or mutual fund because it's not in their purview.
Yeah, that's one of those areas where I think that's why also advisors, let's put it this way, advisors that are like very forward thinking are like, okay, I know that that's what clients want. Is more of like, can we operationally and regulatory wise feel comfortable doing it that way? And I think over time, the answer is going to be, we will have to figure out because that's what the consumer wants.
Definitely.
But I haven't seen enough of a proven, tried way of doing it that we could stand behind and say, okay, everyone should offer that. But it's a great question. It's a very nuanced question.
Yeah.
Okay. So another one that I have here is, it's a good one. So do you think an advisor should be open to managing only parts of one's investments while managing like the whole financial planning, or do you recommend, that they manage everything, right? And I think that's something that comes up a lot in conversation, especially with people that have never hired an advisor. It totally makes sense. It's kind of like, I've never hired an advisor and I feel like maybe I should be able to tip my toe in before you manage everything. And I have a couple of thoughts on this, but John, I would love to hear yours. Like my quick overview on this is there is advantages of the advisor seeing the whole picture. So you could make the argument, look, I don't want to roll over my old 401k yet, or for you to manage, and all that totally makes sense. It's like, look, one step at a time. Let's develop a level of trust here before I move everything. Where we run into issues sometimes is where the person says, well, I don't want to show that I have that because I don't want, like, no, eventually maybe then they'll ask for them to manage it. And then what ends up happening is that you can't then do proper planning if you don't understand where everything is, right? So I don't know if, John, if you agree with that, but that's usually where I see the tension
Yeah, sure.
between both sides.
Totally. Yeah. I think it matters the perspective that the customers or clients are taking. Is this a perspective of this is my first experience and I just want to gain some trust? Is it a perspective of I just don't want to pay the fee and I want to keep it hidden? Is it a perspective of I have illiquid stuff and I just simply can't do it? And on the advisor side, as a fiduciary, what we want to know is we are legally obligated to give the best advice possible. And so if a customer discloses information and it turns out that we gave the wrong advice, we take that so seriously. Yeah. And so we want to know the full package. And obviously an advisor wants to be a larger share of a client's overall portfolio and manage that naturally. But there is a case to be made for something that are inside the industry we call a core and explore model. Maybe you have $500,000 and the core portfolio needs to be broadly diversified and grow for your retirement, and call that 400,000. And maybe there's an explore piece. Maybe you work in an industry in oil and gas or in tech, and you just have a personal inside view where you want to buy a certain number of companies or you want to maintain control of a piece of it. Maybe that's 100,000, and that's what you explore with, but that's not going towards your ultimate financial independence. And I think there's reasonable enough, and I'm just showing examples right now with the dollar amounts, but I think a core and explore method where the advisor is managing the most of it, and you want to be fair on both sides for the value that you're getting. And some advisors simply won't take on some clients if they choose to withhold a majority of their assets, and that's up to finding the right advisor for you, and others are open to it. So it's a great question.
It really is, and it's one of those that you want to feel comfortable with the relationship. And this is one of those areas that I do give a little bit of room from the advisor perspective, because the advisor needs to be comfortable that if they're going to be a fiduciary, like, do they feel like they're actually being a fiduciary by allowing, in essence, to your point, what if the client's like, well, I want to keep 400 to trade in Robinhood and you manage 100? It's like, I don't know if I would feel comfortable being the fiduciary advisor here if I'm letting you. So it is one of those nuanced ones, but that all comes down to trust, right? Developing that trust with.
Definitely.
Wow. I got to say, there's a lot of very specific questions about companies and what we think of them, which I'm like running the calculus of like, how deep do I want to go in this? But I'm just so interested with the color of questions that we have here. So let me see which ones are broader, and then if we have enough time, looking at time. How are you doing on time? You're good?
I'm open. I'm good.
Want to make sure that. Okay. Yeah, maybe another 2 or 3, because we did go over questions wise here. Okay. Ooh, okay. So this is a good one. Okay. Any advice in selecting one of the 2, 3 advisors that Zoe might recommend when they're going through the hiring process, if fees and services appear to be the same? So this is really one of those where I was saying that it's like from the perspective of a big decision, it's like you're buying a house, right? Like, it really is that big of a decision. And from that perspective, I wouldn't solely focus on the fee. There's got to be ranges, right? If someone's telling you, hey, for the exact same service, I'm 10,000 and the other person is saying 5,000, like, okay, but that rarely will be the case, because one of the things that we do when we interview advisors is to make sure that fees are within range for the service that they're providing, right? So there's going to be differences, but if someone's charging 5,000 and the other one's charging 4,800 or 4,500, this is where really trying to make sure that you have a great report, like that you build that report and that you feel like you could trust that person, because ultimately that extra $200 or $300 over the next 20 years is not going to make as much of a difference of the trust that you develop with someone that over time hopefully will steward you towards your retirement of $1 million to $2 million, for $200 difference. You don't want to make those type of decisions like that. But I think that is really important, is the trust aspect. And that really is where that's why it is a little bit of matchmaking, is there's got to be that comfort level, right? You could have 2 professionals that are at the top of their game, and with one of them you hit it off and with the other you don't. So that's why it is important to maybe interview 2, because it's like anything else when you're making a big decision. It's like, okay, now that I see both and both were great, I hit it off with one. I don't know, both our kids play baseball, right? Like, that's the component where what you want to eliminate is making that decision purely because you like someone, right? So you want to have the level of competence and the service that you're looking for, and then the personality, the trust aspect of it is where it should shine. Which is obviously, I think, where Zoe comes in, is that you already start with that level of competence, and then it's like, you know what, I hit it off with John, similar level of service, both highly competent, but I really hit it off with John, and I want to hire him, even if he's not exactly the same price. Okay. Wow. Okay. Okay, this is a good one. And this we get a fair bit, John, and I'm sure you got this one. People that are interested on real estate, as you know, or they own real estate and therefore they're liquid. Like, how do you incorporate that into when you're creating a plan, when you're thinking about people's wealth? And we get this a fair bit, especially if people are like, look, like I have a second home where I generate income, or blah, blah, blah. How does that fall into it? And I think there's kind of an implicit question in there of like, would you charge me, you know, for that net worth, right? I think that's often one that comes up, but that people are like nervous about asking. So any color around that?
Yeah, it's a really good perspective. I think a fiduciary advisor needs to incorporate the real estate as part of the financial plan, but that would be separate from charging as part of an investment management or as an alternative investment management. So the financial plan, they need to take into consideration, what's my tax impact? What's my income planning? How does this fit into my other investments? You know, what is my inheritance going to be to my kids? So there's always going to be conversations there, and a fiduciary advisor needs to incorporate pieces of illiquid assets, whether that's private businesses or real estate, into a full financial plan. I personally don't feel comfortable doing any type of fee assessment on the real estate, because that's a specific niche person. That's a property manager, or it's a specific accountant that can run the profit and loss and the depreciation and all that. And so I'd want, just my personal view of wealth management, the financial planner's job is to bring the professionals together and say, Mr. and Mrs. Klein, it's your financial planner. I can see that you have a tax impact here because you're going to sell this piece of real estate. Or I can see that you're getting this amount of income, which means you don't have to take that much out of your 401k. Now that we've talked about that, let's bring in the property manager to see if there's a way that you can increase your NOI, or let's bring in the accountant to talk about how you can pass this on to the next generation. And so, you know, I think there's a give and a take. Sometimes as an advisor, you give advice on things that are not directly under your control or that you're not charging under, and that's fine. And other times you are charging, you know, just your normal set fee, and there isn't any other special assets out there.
John, I got a last one here to close it out. And then I'll have some closing remarks as well. But I think this is a really important one, and we hear this one a lot. And I think it's one of those, let's put it this way, controversial ones, which is whether an advisor is managing 1 million or 5 million. This is the question I'm reading, and so this is not my opinion, it's just reading it. The action of the financial planner, the actual work they do, isn't it largely similar? So what justifies essentially maybe 4x, 5x the cost if someone has 1 million versus 5 million when managing that 5 million versus 1 million? So I'll say a couple of comments, but I would love to hear your take as an actual practitioner.
Totally.
So what I would say is that there are certain breaking points when it comes to investable assets where, like it or not, things get more complicated, right? So everyone's like, no, but my situation, super simple. I have $5 million. It's super simple. The way, maybe the best way of looking at it is, if you have $5 million, there's a lot more an advisor could do from a tax perspective, and the accounts that they could think about, the structures they could set it up, that often save you multiples of what you're paying extra versus that person that has 1 million. And it's one of those that until you're sitting in front of an advisor that could like actually show you those things, you're like, no, I already sat with my Merrill advisor and they basically said it's the same. It's like, if you sit with an advisor that really knows how to structure things well, you could end up save $30,000, $40,000 in taxes a year by structuring things the right way. So the tax component is one of them. The estate planning is another one that ends up being a lot more complex than people think. Like, who is going to inherit this money? How is it going to be taxed, etc. But I'll stop there and basically say that it should be that they should be able to show you the value that they're going to be able to generate. And often when we hear from after conversations, after they hire the the advisor. Usually it's more of like, there was like 20 questions that I never even asked myself about this, that now that I add it all up, holy smokes, if you compound that over 30 years, like it ends up saving you significantly more money than the extra cost of an advisor that for 5 million versus one. But I would love to take your take. That's just what we see on our end.
Totally. It's a terrific question. It's totally worth it to ask this type of a question. Yeah. It is a piece of friction in the industry, and it can get talked about, on certain various blogs. I do want to take time to take care and break apart a few of the things in here, because it's important to demystify this a little bit. So the first thing, should a 1 million and a 5 million, are they doing the same work? And I'd actually say no, they're doing totally different work, especially if you're talking with a financial planner that's going to cover all the 5 areas like I talked about before: retirement planning, investment management, tax planning, estate planning, and insurance planning. And somebody that has $1 million in net worth, either from investments or real estate, they've got different challenges and opportunities. And the fee that an advisor is getting, that's a specific type of an advisor that should be specializing in that household that has $1 million. And when you talk to somebody that has $5 million, the type of work that they're doing from a financial planning standpoint is different. And maybe that's a different advisor that has a different amount of experience, a different team, other capabilities. And so first of all, they're talking about different things. And I want to compare that to, if you have a $1 million portfolio at Vanguard in their robo-advisor solution and a $5 million portfolio at Vanguard in a robo-advisor solution, if they're not doing any financial planning, let's just put that caveat out there, then why would you want to pay 5x the service? And I don't know the answer to that. But the difference is first, the financial planning. The second is, to your point, Andres, there usually are fee breaks. And so, at our firm, for example, the first $1 million is a 1%. And the next 2 million onto that is a 25% decrease at 75 basis points. And then the next 2 million above that, the 3 million, it goes down to 60 basis points. And it's a 15% decrease in there. So, the all-in fee for a $5 million portfolio
it's not the same
is just under 70 basis points. And so, there is a little bit of economies of scale that you're getting. So it's not purely 5x, but again, the conversations are just totally different, and they should be a different advisor that has different skill and expertise and is willing to meet with different clients. So it's an awesome question, but I hope that.
And this is one of those that I would say it is the advisor's job through the discovery meeting, to show, like, it should become fairly evident, like, okay, holy smokes, I didn't know I could do this. I could do this, or the donor fund, or I couldn't do this. Right. And then you add it all up and you're like, okay, now I get it. Right. But that is a really good question. And one that, in essence, to your point, very controversial. And I think it's not necessarily one of those where, unless you actually start engaging with the conversation with an advisor, that actually could, to your point, that could earn their keep, right?
Yeah,
you'll actually get the answer. But I love those type of questions, because that gets to the core of like really understanding the value that you get. So with that, we're going to wrap it up here. And then the last thing that I would say, and the question came up a number of times, so that's why I saved it at the end, which is, how do we get, within the Zoe process, how do we essentially get to hire someone like John, right? And so the process works is, there's 3 ways. So you could email concierge@zoefin and say, hey, I literally just say, I listened to the call and I want to talk to somebody, or here's my situation. Who do you think you recommend? You go to zoefin.com and literally just fill out a short form. And then the advisors that we believe are best matched or equipped for the goals that you have, the income, assets, location that you have, would present themselves, and you could actually schedule directly with them. Or you could just call. You could call 646-680-9244. If you prefer just to say, look, I'm just going to call and tell you what my situation is, and let me know who the right advisor is. The reason I think this is important, and this leads to what you were saying, John, we understand the nuance of matching people with the right advisor. Mm-hmm. Right? All of them are great advisors in our network. Mm-hmm. But if you, for instance, are in need of someone that is like a true expert in real estate versus someone that is an expert in tech, stock options, we're gonna present the advisor that we think is gonna do the best job for that particular task at hand. So thank you so much all for dialing in. Thanks for all the questions. Super engaged audience. So I really appreciate it. Thank you, John, for joining us and giving us the extra 23 minutes here. It just shows how much engagement there was. And I don't know if John, from your side, any other last comments, remarks?
I'll just say it's an honor to be here. Thanks. And for those people that are listening, finding a good financial advisor for you is so important. It's worth the time and effort. It's a relationship. It takes time to find the right match. And as your life changes, there's always a good advisor to meet those needs, whether it's a one-time plan, a flat fee, or assets under management. So thank goodness we live in an era with good technology and lots of advisors to be able to serve people well. And Zoe is by far one of the best places because they're trying to match the customers with the best advisor that has a specialty in that niche versus some other sources that are out there. So yeah,
awesome.
Good luck to everybody out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Take care.